Canada's authorities are refusing to allow a Hong Kong Western man to return home, even though he has cancer and his young family are in the city on the southern coast of China. The other interesting thing is that anti-Chinese hysteria fostered by Canada's spy agency is now so extreme that even some Canadians of various ethnic backgrounds are calling for a halt. Here's the story. Retired Canadian police officer William Bill Majcher was living and working in Hong Kong when he heard bizarre rumours from friends in Canada that he'd been labelled a hostile communist agent. This was in the summer of last year. Now, Majcher had been working mainly in investment banking and fund management and was on the boards of listed and unlisted companies in Canada, Hong Kong and the US. But he'd also helped an investigator, another former Canadian police officer, in doing some Interpol-style work, running a check on a possible Chinese economic fugitive. Now, in July last year, Majcher told Hong Kong friends he's returning to Canada to clear his name. But on arrival, he was charged with conspiracy and committing preparatory acts for the benefit of a foreign entity. He was locked up for 10 days and then released with bail conditions, which meant he could not return to Hong Kong. Canada's Department of Justice reportedly told the judge at a bail variance hearing that Majcher should not be allowed to return to Hong Kong because of the city's national security law, which enabled arbitrary detentions. That 2020 law is described in the West as banning dissent and introducing arbitrary detentions, although neither subject is even mentioned in the statute at all. Majcher's case became even more bizarre this week when the Canadian press reported that he'd been recruited by Canadian spies to help smuggle guns from Hong Kong across the border into mainland China. The plan was to build a weapons cache in the Chinese mainland, according to La Presse, a Canadian newspaper. Now, this wild allegation appears to be derived from a misreading of filed notes referring to a 2011 conversation Majcher had with an agent working for Canadian intelligence, which is known as CSIS. When discussing Afghanistan and other countries ending with the suffix "stan," the agent asked Majcher if he would be able to arrange the establishment of weapons caches and assist in the movement of sidearms across borders, with the best location being in the vicinity of the Indian Ocean. So Majcher spoke with a US contact who was involved in providing armed security to ships in high-risk regions, with Sri Lanka being a pick-up point. After he provided this information, the subject never came up again. So the Canadian Hong Konger was amazed to see the media allegation this week that he'd been asked to smuggle guns into China, which was not remotely true, he told friends. Now, sources close to the investigation say Majcher was also lamenting the fact that he responded to requests from a Canadian private investigator who was looking into the background of an ethnic Chinese man living in Canada. The investigator asked Majcher to see if the man might be an economic fugitive from China and whether there was any civil claim they could follow up from that country. Ultimately, there was no legal pathway for us in 2017, so we dropped it, Majcher said at the time. But he was then shocked to read reports in Canadian media and in police press releases that said he had threatened a Canadian citizen at the direction of the Chinese government. China had long been recognised as friendly to Western nations until 2018, after a year-long series of meetings of Five Eyes agents, that's intelligence staff from US, UK, Australia, Canada and New Zealand. A programme of heavy demonisation of China began, and it's never stopped. The Canadian spy agency, working with the media, has pushed out stories that are clearly ludicrous, asking people to believe that Chinese leader Xi Jinping, busy governing a country containing 18% of humanity, had an interest in the result of specific local district elections in Canada. The wave of Reds under the bed hysteria hit other individuals too. A security expert called Paul McNamara, who worked at American and Canadian embassies, travelled to Guangzhou in China in October 2019. His mission: to buy an above-ground swimming pool for his daughter, who hoped to represent Canada at the Olympic Games. Now, this trip, which had been cleared by his employers, included a casual phone conversation with Majcher in Hong Kong. On his return, McNamara had his security clearance revoked by the US State Department and found himself out of work. In another case, Peter Maryfield, a celebrated former Mountie with a stellar career, lost his security clearance and his job after merely admitted to having had a beer and a chat with Majcher in the past. Many journalists in Canada, just like their equivalents in UK and Australia, are happy to take anti-Chinese fiction churned out by intelligence services and print them as news. One particularly hostile journalist in Canada is Sam Cooper. Last month he published an image of Bill Majcher with Chinese people at a casino as evidence that the man had met triad leaders. But the photo was actually a scene from a Chinese action comedy film called From Vegas to Macau 2, in which Majcher played a minor role. Yesterday, Cooper wrote a call on the internet for Canada to run a foreign interference investigation into a movement by Chinese Canadians and others to commemorate the horrific Nanjing massacre. But some Canadians have been fighting back against the fear-mongering by their country's intelligence service. Andrew Mitroff, a respected Ontario journalist and professor, wrote in Al Jazeera about the victims of disinformation, the victims of a dangerous hysteria gripping Canada over the scope and nature of Chinese interference in Canadian elections and society, ginned up by scoop-thirsty reporters and timorous spies who do not give a damn about the human costs of their sinister handiwork. Another voice who has spoken out is Matthew Behrens of Rabble.ca, who called for a public inquiry into the spy agency's blatant fear-mongering. Its history, he said, includes racial and religious profiling and exaggerated threat assessments meant to promote bigger budgets. Yes. Even courageous people in the Canadian judiciary have spoken out. In one report, federal court judge Patrick Gleason criticised Canada's Department of Justice and spy agency for a degree of institutional disregard for, or at the very least a cavalier institutional approach to, the duty of candour and, regrettably, the rule of law. The judge's comment about disregarding the rule of law is interesting. Some court papers filed in Montreal last week refer to Canadian spies having to work alongside MI5 officers in Hong Kong. Why? Because until recently there was a clear policy difference between Canadian spies and those of the UK and the US. Canadian spies were obliged to follow the rule of law. But the US and the UK have a different position, a scam. While their governments talk endlessly about the rules-based order and the rule of law, their spies have transnational Black Ops status, meaning they assume the right to break laws anywhere in the world. Now, Canadian spies have traditionally worked with US and UK spies, so they too can break the law. But now they've demanded the same right to act outside the law. There is some good news. After an investigation, Maryfield has finally been exonerated. McNamara is still out in the cold, and Majcher is set to go on trial later this year. At the heart of all this, Majcher has told friends, is needless hostility to China, and to him personally as a Canadian citizen with a friendly relationship with that country. But of course the ultimate loser is humanity as a whole, as the Five Eyes work with hostile Western mainstream journalists to create artificial, needless division between two of the geographically largest countries in the world. And they're doing this just at a time when harmony is most needed. That's why you and me, we have to fight all this so that the world can achieve peace.